If that did something, and I'm going to share my screen again, see what happens. Okay, so you all can see my screen. What is this? Okay. So can you all see the chapter 22, pathogenic fungi?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this week we'll go through chapters 21 and chapter 22. Now, you'll notice these are pretty far along in the book, and as we go through these chapters, you'll understand why. There's a lot of specifics to them, right? There's a lot of outlining that you need to do. I think a lot less lecture on my part is probably necessary, because if I just keep lecturing, it starts to sound the same. All of it starts to sound the same after a while. Whereas if you outline things, which you did successfully in the first few chapters, um, it helps you to understand and put these different pathogenic groups into, put these different pathogenic um, microorganisms into their groups. And that's basically what these two chapters are. Chapter 21 deals with bacteria, specifically rickettsias, chlamydias, spirochetes, and vibrios. And chapter 22 deals with pathogenic fungi, right? So those are eukaryotic. So chapter 21, those are all prokaryotic organisms. Chapter 22, those are all eukaryotic organisms. And so there are some differences among each that you need to go through. I'll start with chapter 22. That was the one I listed first. So it's all about pathogenic fungi. All right, there we go. So fungi are eukaryotic, right? Which means they have a nucleus and they have a cell wall, which many bacteria have cell walls. They have to obtain food from other organisms. Most of them either degrade plants or animals. And they include molds and yeasts, okay? And molds tend to grow as filaments or hyphae, and molds are multicellular. Many cells make up a mold. They have these kind of long filament structures called hyphae, which are similar to plants. Yeasts, on the other hand, are unicellular. They're just one cell big, and they reproduce by budding. So off of one yeast, another bud kind of forms. It gets bigger and bigger and just breaks off of that yeast and becomes its own new yeast. They produce what are called sexual spores. They produce spores, which is their means of reproduction. There are dimorphic fungi. Those dimorphic fungi, what is morphic, or what is morphology?
Shape, how it looks.
The shape or how it looks. Good. So if it's dimorphic, it means it has two different appearances or two different looks to it. So they can appear either as a yeast or as a mold in response to the environment. So when it's more of a moderate temperature, they're multicellular. They look like a mold with hyphae. When it gets warm, when the temperature gets hot, in whatever environment they're in, they appear as a yeast. They are unicellular and they're able to bud and reproduce that way. Just so you know, these temperatures are in Celsius. 25 degrees Celsius is about room temperature. That's about 70 degrees. 37 degrees Celsius is body temperature. It's 98.6. So these things a lot of times look like a mold, maybe in your house or in the environment. And if they get into your body, we'll see that a lot of these things are actually inhaled. When they get into your body, which is 37 degrees Celsius, they can become yeasts, right? Or they appear more as yeasts. And so they can reproduce asexually and produce spores and cause all kinds of problems. Okay, so we are going to go through medical mycology. Mycology is the study of yeast. Okay, so it's the diagnosis of it, the management of it, the prevention of it. These fungal diseases are called mycoses, and they are some of the most difficult things to treat and to diagnose. Oftentimes the signs are missed or misinterpreted. Oftentimes, there are a lot of different symptoms that people can have, so people don't always get the same symptoms, which is why they're misdiagnosed. And they're often resistant even to antifungal agents. A lot of these fungi can be resistant because they can turn to yeast, because they can change from molds to yeasts, that kind of thing. So the epidemiology, kind of the history of it, fungi and their spores are almost everywhere in the environment, and most people will get some sort of a fungal infection at some point in their life. You may not even know it, right? Typically acquired through inhalation, trauma, or ingestion. So usually these are little spores that you either inhale or somehow they get into your mouth when you're eating. Trauma would be like, a car accident, some kind of trauma like that, where you'd have an open wound and a fungus can get in. Um, they are not very often spread from one person to another, right? So if somebody has a fungal infection, it's not very likely that they're contagious. The one major exception are dermatophytes. And so from that word, dermatophytes, phytes are fungus, a type of fungus. Dermata or derma, what do you think derma is affecting?
Skin.
Your skin, right? So there are funguses that affect skin that give you kind of a rash, and those can be contagious. Um, so they are generally not reportable because there's not enough adequate information on the occurrence of them, right? They're not diagnosed really clearly all the time. So there's not a lot of information out there about how this affects people worldwide. As far as how it's categorized, there are true fungal pathogens and opportunistic fungi. Um, True pathogens are going to seek out a host to live out their life cycle. Opportunistic fungi are fungi that will only infect people whose immune systems are compromised, right? They're opportunists. They wait for an opportunity to be available. So most of us would be able to fight off those opportunistic fungi, but if you have a condition where your immune system is weakened, then you might get one of these opportunistic infections. Excuse me. There's only 4 fungi that are considered true pathogens. The others are all opportunistic. And certain risk factors can increase the risk for opportunistic mycoses, right? Like if you have an invasive medical procedure or you're going through a medical therapy, your immune system will be weaker. If you have certain disease conditions, your immune system is weaker. And even specific lifestyle factors make your immune system weaker, right? Obviously IV drug use, but even, lack of sleep, that kind of thing can weaken your immune system. True pathogens are endemic primarily in the Americas. That means that that's usually where they're found in North and South America, but there are opportunistic fungi all over the world. So this table has the factors that predispose individuals to opportunistic mycoses. So these are things which will basically weaken your immune system, making it more likely that you would get one of these opportunistic fungal infections. There is an overview. In this overview, there is a clinical manifestation of these fungal diseases. So there's kind of 3 categories of how this manifests itself, how it shows up clinically. There are fungal infections. These are the most common things. They're caused by the presence of either the pathogens or opportunists, right? You can get an infection with either one of those. Fungal toxicoses are acquired through ingestion. So they occur when poisonous mushrooms are eaten. That's basically the only time that those are going to occur. Poisonous mushrooms put out a toxin. This toxin gets into your digestive system when you eat the mushrooms, and it can wreak havoc on your body. And then there's allergies, and allergies are usually the result from inhaling spores. Like a lot of people have, mold allergies or things like that. The diagnosis is really tough um, because not everybody has the same symptoms. Okay, so the patient's history is really critical for the diagnosis. Were they around something? Were they in an area where there was more of this fungus? Um, and often requires morphological analysis of the fungus involved. So they actually take a culture in the hospital, just like they would take a culture of a bacterial infection, and they grow that up to see what type of fungus it is so that they can understand how to treat it. Um, there are various techniques used to detect these fungal cells in patients, and as we go through these different infections, it'll list that. It is difficult to distinguish them from simple exposures, right? Everybody, because fungus are so prominent, they're present everywhere. Everybody is exposed to them at some point. So if they take a sample from your body and a fungal infection grows, or a fungal organism grows in that sample, is it just that you were exposed to it at one point, or do you actually have it infecting your body somewhere? So opportunistic infections can be very challenging, because so many different things could infect somebody when their body is weakened or when their immune system is weakened. Here are just some examples of fungal stains. Antifungal therapies. So they're almost the most difficult diseases to heal. Often they're resistant to T-cell mediated immune responses. T-cell responses tend to be directed towards bacteria, but fungi often escape their response. They are similar to human cells, and I think that's why things like bacteria look so different from human cells. They're prokaryotic, they're not eukaryotic. So it's hard for our own immune system to detect a fungus. Oftentimes, antifungal drugs can harm human tissues. That's true of a lot of different types of drugs that are given to humans to treat different diseases. And something called ergosterol is that often the target of antifungal drugs. Amphotericin B is the gold standard of antifungals, but there are other less toxic alternatives of antifungal drugs. So those are just some antifungal drugs. So these are some antifungal drugs that do not target that ergosterol, right? And it just tells you what they do target. Oftentimes, opportunistic infections require a two-step treatment. They require a high dose of this antifungal at first to reduce the pathogens, and then kind of a low-dose maintenance therapy because the person's immune system is so weak. Okay. The vaccines have been really difficult to develop, so there's not a lot of fungal vaccines. They're expensive to make. It's hard to develop them. It's hard to know how much they're working or how much they're worth. Scientists have developed vaccines against some fungi, and there are some listed right there. So systemic mycoses caused by pathogenic fungi. What is a systemic mycoses? Who knows what a systemic infection is?
Doesn't target just one part of your body like a foot fungus would. It circulates throughout your whole system.
Good, excellent. So it's something that targets your whole, it doesn't just target one area of your body, it's spread throughout your whole body. It's systemic. It goes to all the systems of your body. There are 4 pathogenic fungi, and they're all of the division Ascomycota, right? So that was one of those 3 divisions that you guys had outlined. And those are the names of them: Histoplasma, Blastomyces, Coccidioides, and Paracoccidioides. They are acquired through inhalation. So it starts off as just a pulmonary infection, something in your lungs, and then it can get into your blood, right? And then goes everywhere your blood goes, which is all over your body. So all 4 of these pathogenic fungi are dimorphic. That means that they all have those 2 forms, right? They can exist either as a mold, which is probably how you inhale it, and then it becomes a yeast once it's in your body. So it becomes these tiny little unicellular organisms that can travel into your bloodstream. So in the environment, they're growing as molds, and then they end up growing as these little spherical yeasts in your body, these little spores, basically. And so here's the life cycle of them, right? You can see in the environment when it's a little bit more moderate out, you get these hyphae, these branches, right? But then once they get into your body, they become these tiny little unicellular spores that bud. And so here are some of the infections or the mycoses caused by pathogenic fungi. Histoplasmosis, which is found in eastern U.S., Africa, and South America. Most of these are going to be found in the U.S. and in South America. The fungus itself is found in a lot of moist soils, which have high nitrogen levels. So they've been, fertilized really well, that kind of thing. Most infections occur through inhaling them. Um, Getting a cutaneous inoculation is very rare. What do you think cutaneous inoculation is?
Into the skin.
Into the skin, right? So it's rare that you would actually get it through your skin. It's more likely that you would inhale these spores from the environment. What happens is this particular species is phagocytized by macrophages in your lungs, and then they disperse the fungi beyond the lungs through the blood and the lymph. So if you know anything about anatomy and physiology, obviously the blood system, the capillaries are really closely related to the lungs. So it's pretty easy for things which are in your lungs to get into your bloodstream and then travel throughout your body. People who have histoplasmosis oftentimes don't even know it. It's usually asymptomatic and it can resolve without damage. That's one of the reasons that these things are so hard to detect. Some people may not even have any symptoms of it. The diagnosis is based on an identification of yeast in a patient sample. Infections in healthy individuals usually resolve on their own, right? Or it can be treated with a couple of drugs when necessary. And here is the characteristic spiny spores of this particular species of fungus. So you can see these spores with the spines on them. So if they took a sample from an infection in your body and they found this in the sample, then they would know that it's this fungal infection. So that was one of the four. Second one is called blastomycosis. There's the causative agent right there, blastomyces dermatitis. It is found in southeastern U.S. and all the way north to Canada. Again, this is a fungus that's found in soils which have a lot of organic matter. You get pulmonary blastomycosis. Most of these are inhaled, right? That's the most common manifestation. Um, Initially, you get these pulmonary lesions, these lesions in your lungs, which mostly are asymptomatic. You may not even know that they're there. The disease resolves in most people, but it can become chronic in some people. There are lesser found, I guess, cases where it can affect different things. So there's cutaneous blastomycosis, osteoarticular blastomycosis. So cutaneous is actually going to affect the skin, give you lesions on your skin. Osteoarticular is the joints, right, between your bones. Meningitis, this fungus can cause meningitis, which affects the layers surrounding your brain and your spinal cord, the membranes surrounding your brain and your spinal cord. Again, it's diagnosed based on the identification of a fungus in culture, right? So they take a sample of this infection, they grow it in a petri dish, and they, do all kinds of different testing of that fungus that's growing to come up with the actual identification of it. Relapse is common in AIDS patients. So AIDS patients obviously have a severely compromised immune system. So it is common that if they get this fungal infection once, that they'll relapse from it. The third type of fungal infection caused by these pathogenic fungi, coccidiomycosis, almost exclusively in the southwestern U.S. and northern Mexico. Again, the fungus is in the soil. Infection rates have risen in these areas, but population expansion has been really big in these areas. So that could be why infection rates are rising. And basically, you inhale arthroconidia, which are like little spores, which germinate in your lung. Right? And here's what it would look like if they cultured that infection. So it most often results in pulmonary conditions. It can disseminate to other sites, but usually that's only in people who are immunocompromised. So it can go to other areas of your body, but usually it's only if your immune system is really weak. Right? And then the fourth one is paracoccidiosis, and found in kind of the same areas, southern Mexico and regions of South America, so further south. Um, Again, the infection begins as a pulmonary condition, but this fungus almost always spreads, which produces a more chronic inflammatory disease of all your mucous membranes. The diagnosis is based on the presence of yeast, um, and it's treated with these various drugs. So for those 4 pathogenic fungi, you need to know where they're found. You need to know what drugs typically treat them, and what they can cause. The rest of this chapter are mycoses, infections that are caused by opportunistic fungi, which means they typically don't affect healthy people, but they are limited to people with poor immune systems, um, which has become more important as the number of people with AIDS around the world rises, because obviously AIDS devastates your immune system. They're difficult to identify because their symptoms are so atypical, meaning that, you know, 2 people could get the same infection and have completely different symptoms because they're opportunistic. They're just going for a weak area of your body. One common one is called pneumocystis pneumonia. Okay, transmission is most likely through inhalation. Again, infection in immunocompetent is usually asymptomatic. So if your immune system is working, usually you don't even notice that you have this infection, but it is a common fungal infection among AIDS patients. And here are some cysts that are in lung tissue. So these, lung tissue should be nice and clear. These little areas that are nice and clear would have oxygen in them that you can get into your bloodstream. And instead you have these cysts in there because of this particular fungus. Candidiasis is called like Candida albicans. It's a very common opportunistic infection. It's probably the most common one. It is a common microbiota of the skin and of the mucous membranes. It's one of the few that can be transmitted between individuals. So it's what causes athlete's foot, right? So if one person has athlete's foot, they can spread it to another, like say at the gym, right? That's why it's called athlete's foot. They're both showering and using the same equipment, basically. All cases of the disease result from an opportunistic infection, can produce a wide range of diseases. Um, and so there are several pages on candidiasis, right? And you can see it's what causes thrush, which is really common in infants. It causes skin rashes. It causes yeast infections that women get, right? This is all caused by the same fungus. Urinary tract infections. It's actually a really common infection for ocular infections for eyes. The diagnosis is based on the presence of clusters of budding yeasts. Um, the treatment depends on where it's affecting your body. Other systemic mycoses caused by opportunistic fungi, aspergillosis, um, several different diseases that are caused by the fungi in the genus Aspergillus. They can be found throughout the environment. Again, disease occurs from inhalation of the fungal spores, most commonly causes only allergies in people. But there are 3 pulmonary diseases that can develop from it. Okay. Cryptococcosis is another opportunistic one. There's the main causative agent. This actually results from inhalation of spores or dried yeasts that are found in bird droppings. Um, occurs in individuals, again, with little immune system function. So these are all opportunistic diseases. Okay. Cryptococcosis is diagnosed based on the identification of the fungus in the patient sample. So in all of these, they're going to take a sample of the infection and grow it up in a petri dish and see what the fungus is. Other opportunistic fungal infections, zygomycoses, common all over the world. They are seen or commonly seen in people with uncontrolled diabetes, people who inject illegal drugs, some cancer patients, and some patients receiving antimicrobials. Usually develops in the face and the hand. Again, these people have weakened immune systems. Okay. And then it goes on to talk about the emergence of certain opportunistic infections in AIDS patients, as AIDS has become more of a worldwide disease, and more people across the world have um, have been positive for AIDS. There are more of these opportunistic fungal infections. Superficial mycoses are the most common fungal infections. They're confined to the outer layer of skin, nails, or hair, right? That's why they're superficial. There are also dermatophytoses, which are infections of the skin, nail, or hair caused by dermatophytes, um, previously called ringworms. This is something that wrestlers would get a lot of times from a mat. You get you get a thing like on your skin from the mat, from somebody else who was infected on the mat. Um, that's what ringworm is usually. And then below the superficial ones would be cutaneous and subcutaneous mycoses. These are ones that actually can affect deeper layers of the skin. They are less common because most lesions remain localized to the superficial layer. So these cause tumors, that kind of thing. Um, again, these fungi are usually found in the soil. Okay. Surgical removal is usually required for treatment. And then there are some fungi that produce toxins that cause allergies. So like we talked about, the mushrooms can produce toxins. You can get toxicosis. Um, so from mushrooms, you can, eat a mushroom and get mushroom poisoning. That's usually what these toxins are from eating these fungi. Okay. So,
May I ask a question?
sure.
Um, do warts fall into any of these categories?
No. Warts are actually just skin cells, overgrown skin cells. So they're
Huh, I
not,
see.
yeah,
I thought they
no,
might be from the soil or something. Okay, thank you.
nope. You're welcome. So you can see that there's a lot of these fungal infections, right? There's actually only 4 that are considered pathogenic. The rest are opportunistic. Um, and make sure you know the 4 groups, know what they cause, how they're treated. Most of them are in the soil. They get, inhaled, and then they can turn to a yeast at that higher body temperature, and get into your bloodstream and travel and cause more systemic infection. Okay. So that's a meaty chapter. To me, that's a meaty chapter. I don't like it. Then the other chapter, chapter 21, is dealing with prokaryotes, with bacteria. So rickettsia, chlamydia, spirochetes, and vibros, or vibrios, I should say. So we'll start with rickettsia. So these are all prokaryotic, right? Rickettsias happen to be gram-negative. You learned briefly gram-negative and gram-positive. They almost all look like they do not have a wall because they have so little peptidoglycan in their cell walls. Um, they do have DNA, RNA, ribosomes. They can make ATP. They can reproduce by binary fission. So they're living organisms. They're prokaryotes. They are obligate intracellular parasites, meaning they can only live inside another organism. And there are 4 genera that cause diseases in humans. Okay. Rickettsia, they are non-motile, right? They can't move around. They're aerobic bacteria, so they require oxygen. Not a problem if they live in humans. We have plenty of oxygen. These are the ones that are transmitted via arthropods. So these are through insect bites, so like tick bites. Okay. The bacteria actually live in the cytosol of the host cell. So they live like in the cytoplasm of a host. And there are 3 species that cause most human infections. Those are the species there. One of the infections you probably heard of is Rocky Mountain spotted fever. It's probably the most common of all these rickettsia illnesses, transmitted by ticks, right? And so the ticks bite a human, and they can actually transmit the disease or the bacteria to the human. Most infected individuals have a rash. Only about 5% of patients die. They are treated with antimicrobials, and prevention involves avoiding ticks. With all of these, a lot of the prevention is avoiding ticks, right? And that's the same thing. We'll talk about Lyme disease in a few minutes, but that's big in this area of the country. And you know that you have to spray yourself when you go outside. You know that, when you come home, you check for ticks, and we just, we know that. We know that we have to do these things. So that goes a long way in preventing these different diseases. And so here's a map of cases of Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Most of them are not near the Rocky Mountains. They're in the east, which is unusual, but the first cases were identified out west. That's why it's named that. Okay, and you can see here, they go on to talk about the pathogenesis, how it actually gets into your bloodstream. The other 2 types of rickettsias that they talked about that cause disease, here's the geographical distribution of ehrlichiosis and anaplasmosis in the United States. So you can see that a lot of those are actually localized in the east. And here's a nice table that gives you characteristics. So you can see what the organism is here, what the primary vectors are. So a tick, in this case, a body louse, that's lice, right? A flea, a mite, which mites are like ticks that live in the dust, and another couple of ticks. So, right, here's the reservoirs. Here's what they go through. Right, these fleas live on rodents, for example, and here are the diseases they can cause. And these are only ones that are caused by rickettsias. Okay, we'll see that Lyme disease is caused by a different bacteria. Then we get to, so that was ricketsias. We get to chlamydias. Chlamydias were once considered to be viruses. Chlamydias don't have cell walls. They have 2 membranes, and they don't have any peptidoglycan between them. So they're not just gram-negative. They don't have any cell walls at all. They have a unique developmental cycle involving 2 forms, what are called elementary bodies and reticulate bodies, but both forms can occur within the phagosome of a host cell. So basically what that means is a host cell can even engulf these bacteria to try to get rid of them, and these life forms can actually maintain inside the phagosome. So inside the host cell that's trying to eat it. So you can see here's a host cell, right? And there are elementary bodies and reticulate bodies inside that host cell. Chlamydia trachomatis has a limited host range. One strain infects mice, all the others infect humans. Enters the body through cuts, infects the conjunctiva and various mucous membranes, and it's the most common reported STD in the U.S. Chlamydia. Clinical manifestations are due to cell destruction and inflammation. So it's actually also a major cause of eye infections worldwide. It's endemic in poor communities without adequate personal hygiene. So it's one of the things they worry about, that being passed from a mother to a child during childbirth. Right? It is a sexually transmitted disease, chlamydia trachomatis. Um, you get an initial genital lesion, followed by these buboes, which are like swollen lesions, basically like pus filled. And most infections in women are asymptomatic, but reinfection can over and over again can lead to things like pelvic inflammatory disease, which can lead to cancer, can lead to a woman being sterile, that kind of thing. So there's just a picture of somebody with chlamydia. Trachoma is the ocular disease. That's the one that's more common worldwide. It is one of the leading cause, or the leading cause, of non-traumatic blindness in humans. So the leading cause of blindness that's not like something, traumatic accident happening to your eyes. Scarring of the conjunctiva, which is the layer that covers your eyes, causes the eyelashes to turn. Okay. It typically occurs during childbirth. So during childbirth, they actually, right after your child's born, they put eye drops in their eyes. Treatments are antibiotics. Remember, these are bacteria. They can be treated by antibiotics. Prevention, abstinence to prevent sexually transmitted diseases or safe sex. Blindness is prevented with prompt use of antibacterial agents. So, like I said, they put drops in your baby's eyes right after birth. So here we can get to some characteristics of the small microbes. Um, Rickettsia and chlamydias are the smallest bacteria. You can see them compared to viruses, right? So sometimes in the past they were mistaken as viruses because they are so small. When we get to spirochetes, spirochetes are helical shaped, so they look like a coil, like a corkscrew, and that's how they move through their environment, which allows them to kind of burrow through host tissues. And there are three genera that cause human disease: treponemia, Borrelia, leptospira. Treponemia is most widespread, and the treponema strain, it causes syphilis, right? And syphilis is found all over the world. It's almost solely uh, transmitted through sexual contact. And here you can see spirochetes. So all these kind of corkscrew things are actually the bacteria that is infecting you, or infecting a person. The disease itself, syphilis, has four phases: primary, secondary, latent, and tertiary. It can be deadly, uh, primarily because it goes latent after that secondary phase, and people may think that they got rid of it, and then it goes to that that tertiary stage. An infected mother can transmit that to her unborn child, and it can result in fetal death or severe mental retardation or malformation. So there are some pictures of syphilis. So as far as treatment, penicillin is the drug that's used to treat it. Once the syphilis gets to that tertiary stage, though, penicillin is ineffective. So again, prevention is abstinence and safe sex. Um, Another spirochete that's really common is Borrelia. Borrelia causes Lyme disease, which is big in this part of the country. It's actually named because the first cases were found in Old Lyme, Connecticut. Um, Lyme disease, which most of you know, is caused by a tick, I should say that the bacteria lives part of its life in a tick, and it can be transmitted to humans through a tick bite. Um, so the tick life cycle is important for understanding Lyme disease, and generally the prevention of this is just to try to prevent tick bites, right? So we spray for ticks. We spray ourselves with spray to try to get rid of the ticks. We make sure that we're checking for ticks right after we've been out in the woods, that kind of thing. And you can see that these spirochetes are in between all the red blood cells, right? So they can lead to a lot of different causative agents, but usually it's fatigue. It's, you're not getting enough oxygen around your body. So this just goes through the life cycle of these ticks, right? In the first year, they actually can infect a bird or a rodent, and then they start to multiply and get bigger. The adult ticks feed on deer and other animals, and so this is when they can actually end up biting you. These deer ticks can end up biting you and transmitting the disease to us. So Lyme disease has a broad range of signs and symptoms. What else? So treatment of the later stages is difficult. Antimicrobial drugs are effective to treat the first stages. The best prevention, or the best treatment, is really to prevent it. Then we get leptospira. These are motile, obligately aerobic bacteria, meaning that they move and they need oxygen. They're found in a lot of wild and domestic animals worldwide. And then we've got pathogenic gram-negative vibrios. They have a lot of characteristics that they share with enteric bacteria. Does anybody know what enteric bacteria are? Where they are? These are the bacteria that live in your gut. So inside our intestines, we have bacteria, quote unquote, good bacteria, bacteria that don't cause disease, that live in our gut and help us to digest certain foods. And Vibrio actually are very similar to a lot of those bacteria. They are found in water worldwide. Here's a picture of those. One of the most well-known things that they can cause is cholera. Cholera is usually caused because of somebody ingests contaminated water, right? Usually it's in a country where they don't have as good of a water treatment facilities as we have in America. And it can cause severe diarrhea, which leads to huge amounts of uh, severe loss of fluid and electrolytes. You lose water very quickly, you get dehydrated very quickly. And here you can see a map uh, of the spread of cholera in the Americas during the most recent pandemic. So here's the action of cholera in the intestinal epithelial cells. Again, it does some biochemistry in the intestinal cells, and I'm not going to ask you about this biochemistry, so don't worry about it. But it essentially allows water to just flow directly through your intestines instead of being absorbed into your cells. And that's why you end up with severe diarrhea and very quickly end up dehydrated. Um, Other pathogenic gram-negative vibrios. Um, there's one here called Campylobacter jejuni. It's likely the most common cause of gastroenteritis in the U.S. You can be infected by consuming contaminated food or milk. And then Helicobacter pylori also fits into this category. Helicobacter pylori is the bacteria that most often causes ulcers in humans. And what you can see, and you can see some of them here, in the stomach, what it does is it thins out the layer of mucus that lines your stomach. And so it ends up that your stomach acid actually starts to affect the cells of your stomach. And that's where you get an ulcer. The stomach acid actually eats through the cells of your stomach because you don't have as much protective mucus there. Again, it's treated with antimicrobial drugs, prevention. Again, just good hygiene, proper food handling is good prevention of it. So, meaty chapters today, right? We went through the basics the first couple weeks of kind of gram negative, gram positive, prokaryotic, eukaryotic, that sort of thing. This week we ended up going to there you are. This week we ended up going into more detailed, very detailed notes on both fungi that can cause infections and on some of the bacteria, some specific bacteria. So again, what I plan on doing, I will post some homework assignments for you today. I will make them due Sunday night at midnight. That'll give you a few days to do them, because these are going to serve as outlines. So that will give me Monday to review them, and that will still give you kind of most of the week to study for the test. I'll make the test due next weekend. It'll be due Sunday by midnight. I'll probably open it up Friday and make it due Sunday by midnight, that kind of thing. Are there questions from any of you guys?
Will there be like a time limit on the exam, like a time period where, like an hour, or?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it will be something like that, and I'll definitely, when I publish it, I'll say you have an hour, or you have 90 minutes, or whatever to do this. So even though I'll open it up for like 2 or 3 days, you won't be able to go in there and then leave and come back, right? You'll have to go in and take it all at one time.
And like you said, so the format's only like multiple choice, and then you're just
Right. So I plan on doing multiple choice, and some, matching true false, which I consider kind of the same as multiple choice. Um, and then I'm toying with the idea of putting 1 or 2 essay questions on there, but I'm not quite sure whether I will or not. So I'll let you know when I make up the time.
okay. And like to study for it, do you recommend just like obviously reviewing the PowerPoints and then the homework is kind of like you had mentioned, like a good way to kind
Yeah,
of, okay,
absolutely. The homework, my intention with the homework is to get you guys to create your own study guides. So
okay,
if you've done the homework, you've already put in a few hours of studying of each of those chapters, because that's what it takes, is to go back through the chapter and write down, oh, okay, this is, these are these 3 groups and these are what they caused. And that's a big part of it. So yes, using those as study guides will help a lot.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. So I did record this. I will post this probably this evening. It usually takes a few hours for that to format correctly. So I'll post that this evening along with some homework for you guys. And please let me know if you have any questions. Okay. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.